The Watsons by Jane Austen, Part 8. "Here we are, back again, I declare," said Emma sorrowfully, as she walked into the dining room where the table was prepared, and the neat upper maid was lighting the candles. "My dear Miss Edwards, how soon it is at an end! I wish it would come all over again." A great deal of kind pleasure was expressed in her having enjoyed the evening so much, and Mr. Edwards was as warm as herself in praise of the fullness, brilliancy, and spirit of the meeting, though as he had been fixed the whole time at the same table in the same room, with only one change of chairs, it might have seemed a matter scarcely perceived. But he had won 4 rubbers out of 5, and everything went well. His daughter felt the advantage of his gratified state of mind in the course of the remarks and retrospections which now ensued over the welcome soup. "How came you not to dance with either of the Mr. Tomlinsons, Mary?" said her mother. "I was always engaged when they asked me." "I thought you were to have stood up with Mr. James the last 2 dances. Mrs. Tomlinson told me he was gone to ask you, and I had heard you say 2 minutes before that you were not engaged." "Yes, but there was a mistake. I had misunderstood. I did not know I was engaged. I thought it had been for the 2 dances after, if we stayed so long, but Captain Hunter assured me it was for those very 2. "So you ended with Captain Hunter, Mary, did you?" said her father. "And who did you begin with?" "Captain Hunter," was repeated in a very humble tone. That is being constant, however. But who else did you dance with?" "Mr. Norton and Mr. Styles." "And who are they?" "Mr. Norton is a cousin of Captain Hunter's." "And who is Mr. Styles?" "One of his particular friends." "All in the same regiment," added Mrs. Edwards. "Mary was surrounded by redcoats that whole evening, and I should have been better pleased to see her dancing with some of our old neighbours, I confess." Yes, we must not neglect our old neighbours, but if these soldiers are quicker than other people in the ballroom, what are young ladies to do?" "I think there is no occasion for their engaging themselves so many dances beforehand, Mr. Edwards." "No, perhaps not, but I remember, my dear, when you and I did the same." Mrs. Edwards said no more, and Mary breathed again. A great deal of good-humoured pleasantry followed, and Emma went to bed in charming spirits, her head full of Osbornes, Blakes, and Howards. The next morning brought a great many visitors. It was the way of the place always to call on Mrs. Edwards on the morning after a ball, and this neighbourly inclination was increased in the present instant by a general spirit of curiosity on Emma's account, as everybody wanted to look again at the girl who had been admired the night before by Lord Osborne. Many were the eyes, and various the degrees of approbation with which she was examined. Some saw no fault, and some no beauty. With some her brown skin was the annihilation of every grace, and others could never be persuaded that she were half so handsome as Elizabeth Watson had been 10 years ago. The mornings passed quietly away in discussing the merits of the ball with all this succession of company, and Emma was at once astonished by finding it 2 o'clock, and considering that she had heard nothing of her father's chair. After this discovery she had walked twice to the window to examine the street, and was on the point of asking leave to ring the bell and make inquiries, when the light sound of a carriage driving up to the door set her heart at ease. She stepped again to the window, but instead of the convenient but very unsmart family equipage perceived a neat curricle. Mr. Musgrave was shortly afterwards announced, and Mrs. Edwards put on her very stiffest look at the sound. Not at all dismayed, however, by her chilling air, he paid his compliments to each of the ladies with no unbecoming ease, and continuing to address Emma, presented her a note which he had the honour of bringing from her sister, but to which he must observe that a verbal postscript from himself would be requisite. The note, which Emma was beginning to read rather before Mrs. Edwards had entreating her to use no ceremony, contained a few lines from Elizabeth importing that their father, in consequence of being unusually well, had taken the sudden resolution of attending the visitation that day, and that as his road lay quite wide from R, it was impossible for her to come home till the following morning, unless the Edwardses would send her, which was hardly to be expected, or she could meet with any chance conveyance, or did not mind walking so far. She had scarcely run her eye through the whole before she found herself obliged to listen to Tom Musgraves's farther account. "I received that note from the fair hands of Miss Watson only 10 minutes ago," said he. "I met her in the village of Stanton, whither my good stars prompted me to turn my horses' heads. She was at that moment in quest of a person to employ on the errand, and I was fortunate enough to convince her that she could not find a more willing or speedy messenger than myself. Remember, I say nothing of my disinterestedness. My reward is to be the indulgence of conveying you to Stanton in my curricle. Though they had not written down, I bring your sister's orders for the same." Emma felt distressed. She did not like the proposal. She did not wish to be on terms of intimacy with the proposer, and yet fearful of encroaching on the Edwardses, as well as wishing to go home herself, she was at a loss how entirely to decline what he offered. Mrs. Edwards continued silent, either not understanding the case or waiting to see how the young lady's inclination lay. Emma thanked him, but professed herself very unwilling to give him so much trouble. The trouble was, of course, honour, pleasure, delight. What had he or his horses to do? Still she hesitated. She believed she must beg leave to decline his assistance. She was rather afraid of that sort of carriage. The distance was not beyond a walk. Mrs. Edwards was silent no longer. She inquired into the particulars and then said, "We shall be extremely happy, Miss Emma, if you can give us the pleasure of your company until tomorrow. But if you cannot conveniently do so, our carriage is quite at your service, and Mary will be pleased with the opportunity of seeing your sister." This was precisely what Emma had longed for, and she accepted the offer most thankfully, acknowledging that as Elizabeth was entirely alone, it was her wish to return home to dinner. The plan was warmly opposed by their visitor. "I cannot suffer it, indeed. I must not be deprived of the happiness of escorting you. I assure you there is not a possibility of fear with my horses. You might guide them yourself. Your sisters all know how quiet they are. They have none of them the smallest scruple in trusting themselves with me, even on a racecourse. Believe me," he added, lowering his voice, "you are quite safe. The danger is only mine." End of part 8.